Hello, and welcome to The Connection. This podcast is about understanding and building the connection we have with others and with ourselves. I hope that through this podcast, you'll be able to have more joy and fulfillment in your life. I'm your host, Jared Hurst. This week, I want to talk with you about something that's been affecting some of the people that I love. And that topic is fear. Now, fear is a really interesting emotion, and just the way that it affects us and the way that it can build, with every emotion, I think they have a tendency to get out of control and grow at times. But fear is such an interesting one because there's some of it that's based in reality and there's some of it that is based in fiction. Now, I want to talk about some examples. I always love sharing examples whenever we're talking about any topic. So out of respect for the people that I love, I'm going to focus on some of my own fears and kind of approach it from that perspective. Before I get into that, I want to say things are actually going really well in my life. I'm excited about the trajectory of how things are going. I'm having a lot of success at work. I'm having some great family relationships. I'm optimistic about some of my personal relationships. Overall, I'm just really excited about how things are going. But it's kind of hard to talk about fears without talking about, the things that aren't going well. So I'm just going to kind of jump into some of those things as I go through this process with you. Before I jump into fear directly, I want to kind of remind you about my overall philosophy around emotional regulation, in case you haven't listened to those episodes. When it comes to emotional regulation, my belief is that each emotion has a purpose. Like, why else would evolution or God or however you believe, why else would we have emotions? They're for a purpose, right? And if you look at it from just a purely biological standpoint, our mind, our body, everything is about safety and keeping us alive and perpetuating the race and, all that stuff. When you look at something like fear, it, like every other emotion, has a purpose, something that is going to benefit us in our lives. When you look at fear, what is its purpose? Why is it there? And if you really look at what fear is it's a perceived potential threat. Fear is a perceived potential threat. So how can we work with that? There's things we can do in order to create safety for ourselves. And when we create that safety for ourselves, a lot of the times that emotion will dissipate or it will completely resolve. So that's kind of what I want to go through with you, is the ways in which we can work with fear in order to create that safety. When you look at that definition and you look at what it is, it's a perceived potential threat. And I think the first key word there is that it's a perception. Our perceptions don't always have to be based in reality. Back when I was, I think I was 12, my friend decided that he, in his wisdom, would invite me to come over to his house and watch the movie Arachnophobia. If I could go back in time, I would never go over to watch that show. But up until that moment, I had never been scared of spiders. You could catch me out on a sidewalk playing with a spider and with basically any bug for that matter. I never really looked at insects or anything of that sort as being a threat to my safety. After that, I probably dealt with arachnophobia, like fear of spiders, for probably a good 20, 25 years before I really started to get over it. I had to work really hard. But how much of that fear was based in reality, right? Like if you look at it in Utah, there's 2 spiders that I'm aware of that actually pose any real threat to us. In reality, most of the time that perception, that fear, is not rational. It's not something that I really need to be concerned about, but it's there. Okay? So I think understanding that our perception plays a massive role in fears. I think when you look at it, we have physical fears that actually have very real threats in our life. I have a threat or a fear around heights. Now, is my fear in line with the level of threat? Probably not. I would say that I'm more scared of heights than I need to be. And so I have to work really hard in order to keep that fear in check, in order to help create safety when I'm out in that kind of environment. But that is a real threat, right? There is a danger of falling when you're up at a high amount. So it's good that our mind is on alert, that it's trying to keep us safe from physical harm. And then a lot of the times when we look at, more mental-based threats, sometimes those aren't as helpful. Sometimes those are actually keeping us from the lives that we want to live and keeping us from taking action. So I think it's really important to learn how to manage our perceptions and learn how to look at things. The other key thought there is its potential threat. It's not inevitable, right? Just because we have a threat out there and we're feeling fearful because we understand that something could happen doesn't mean that we need to constantly focus on it. Like one example that I'll give you that I'll use for a couple of these things that we're talking about today is I have a client that's selling a home. Right now, that home is under contract. But it's so important to that person that everything goes smoothly and that the sale goes through. And I think this is true for most real estate agents. That even though we've been through this process of helping somebody sell their home so many times, we always want things to go well. And so we are on the lookout for those threats. We're on the lookout for ways in which things won't work out. And I'm supposed to do that. Like, that's part of my job, is to protect my client, to look after their needs and their wants, and make sure that I'm doing everything I can to give them the best possible experience that I can. Even though that threat is only potential, I do need to be aware of it. I just can't allow it to overwhelm me, or at least I shouldn't allow it to overwhelm me, because especially in that environment where I'm their realtor, my job is to stay logical. My job is to stay solution-oriented and find ways in order to make things work out for the benefit of my client. My job is to be rational when they're being emotional. I think that's really important, that when you look at it, that a lot of the times the threats that we're looking at, yes, they're there and we need to be aware of them, but it is just potential. So what ways can we work towards safety when we're in a fear response in order to lessen or eliminate that threat? One of the things that is really helpful when it comes to dealing with this feeling of fear is knowledge. When we gain information, that can show us whether that threat is real or whether it's significant. The more knowledge we have, the more we're able to plan and find a way to deal with it, right? If I know that, for instance, if I'm working with a client and their house is under contract, we're getting to the point where we're going to do the inspection. I know that there's a potential that the buyer comes in and finds something wrong with the home, and that because of the things that they find, that could actually cause a threat to that house being sold. So that is a real threat. But the more knowledge I have, if I know that there's been a previous inspection on that home within like the last year or 2 years, because let's say my client bought their home 2 years ago and now they're selling it again, and I know what that last inspection had, and I know what was wrong with the home at that time, I know that unless something major has happened behind the scenes that we're not aware of in the last 2 years, that there's not as much of a threat as, say, if my client has lived there for 30 years. There's just less time for something major to have happened that's going to come up in that inspection report. So having knowledge can help us to eliminate or lessen the threat. You can get that knowledge through a lot of different ways. Let's say you're having a lot of threat around your relationship. You're concerned about how well things are going. Having an open conversation with that other person can often help us feel better about what's going on, right? A lot of the times, if you're feeling a lot of anxiety around a relationship or a friendship or whatever it might be, when all of a sudden you have this open dialogue and actually express your fears with that person, you can work through it and you can create a feeling of safety with that person. And in fact, you're going to connect more with that person because you've been able to be open, you've been able to be vulnerable, and you've been able to create safety with one another. And then I think also it's like when you have knowledge, you're able to look at the different possibilities and you're able to look at solutions. If I, as a realtor, I've been doing this for a long time. And so because I have been doing it for a long time, I believe in my ability to find solutions for my clients. As soon as that inspection report comes back, and as soon as I know what the buyer found during their inspection, that eliminates a lot of the threat, even if they found major things in the inspection. Because once I know what I'm dealing with, then I can find a solution. I can say, okay, they looked at the house, everything looked good, but the roof is bad. Well, then I can start looking at it and say, all right, what ways can I make this threat less? What ways can I make it so there's a win for both the buyer and the seller, so that my client is able to get what they want in selling the home, and the buyer is able to get what they want in getting a house that's in good condition. So I'm able to start finding strategies. So whatever it is that you're dealing with right now, whatever it is you're feeling scared about, look at it and say, well, how can I get more knowledge in order to help me in this process? Another thing that can really help us towards safety is our belief system. We can create and cultivate beliefs in ourselves, and those beliefs can help us feel more safe. So let's say we're looking in the world of dating. I like to talk about dating because I feel that it's something that relates a lot to my family. You know, I'm single, so there's a lot of it that relates to me. Anyway, that's one of the examples I like to use. One of the belief systems that I've cultivated in myself is that if somebody doesn't want me, then they're doing me a favor. I want to have a relationship. When I ask myself, if I'm being honest with myself, do I want to be in a relationship with somebody that doesn't really want me or isn't sure about me? No. I want to be in a relationship with somebody that looks at me and says, dang, that's the guy that I want to be with. So a lot of the times, if you're dealing with fears in like a relationship, or you're dealing with fears in a work environment or a friendship, or whatever it is that you're dealing with a fear in, what kind of empowering belief can you create that will help you in the event that that perceived threat becomes real? Does that make sense? What belief system can I create that will help me be okay if this threat becomes a reality? And by having that empowering belief, not only do you mitigate the fear that you have of that becoming true, if it does become true, you're also in a better space to deal with it because you have this empowering belief that you've created for yourself. The third thing that I think is really important in order to help you create safety around fear is faith. And I'm not necessarily talking about religious faith, though if that is something, if you have religious beliefs, religious faith can be incredibly powerful to help us deal with different fears that we're dealing with. But what I'm referring to is faith in ourselves, faith in our adaptability, and faith that things will work out the way that they are meant to. I have this belief in myself. I have this faith in myself, and I have this faith in the course of my life that things are working for my good. That as I look back through my life, I can see where the struggles I've had have helped me to become a better man. I can see where the fears that I've had and the setbacks and the challenges have all had some type of a benefit to my life if I choose to make them so. I get to decide how I react to the things that come into my life, and because I believe in myself, because I believe in my ability to adapt, because I believe in my ability to grow and learn from the things that happen in my life, that faith in myself and that faith that no matter what happens, I can use it for my benefit, makes it so that when I hold on to that faith, that those fears are lessened and they're diminished, because I have this thing that makes it so it's not as scary as it is when I don't have that faith. So those are the three things that really can help you. If you're feeling fear around something, if you have something in your life that's just causing a lot of grief for you, look at it and say, what knowledge can I gain? What belief systems can I implement that will help me? What ways can I have more faith and less doubt? I like to look at a scenario and say, okay, let's say this does work out this way. What are the worst possible scenarios? How am I going to solve those if they happen? All of a sudden, I've created safety for myself because I know that if one of these scenarios works out, I already have a response. I already have a solution that will take me forward. With all that said, fear can be debilitating. Fear can spiral and get out of control. When we sit there and we ruminate and think about the thing that is causing us to feel fear, it will grow and, it can feel like we can't deal with it. I think that's true of any emotion. Usually there is some type of a thought, and the more we focus on that thought, the bigger that emotion gets. And it's definitely true with fear. And I look at it kind of as like a scale. Have you ever seen those little metal scales where you've got like a balance on one side and a balance on the other, and then the more stuff you put on one side, it just kind of tilts that way? Well, I think that's really true when it comes to a fear response. When we're in a fear response, our scale is completely weighted towards threat. Our mind is looking for all the threats and the ways in which we could be harmed. And it can be really easy to get so focused on all the threats that we don't see anything but that. A really great example of that is what they call an anxious attachment style. I have or am recovered from an anxious attachment style. I don't know how to tell when you're fully cured from something, but I would say that I'm definitely on the path to overcoming this. An anxious attachment style is where when you're in a romantic relationship or even in like a personal relationship, like a friendship, like a platonic relationship, you're concerned about losing connection with that person. You worry about all the different ways in which things can go wrong or the things that you might have done. And I've had that. Right now, I've been dating somebody, and it's the first time that I've really dated in a long while. And it's the first person that I've dated in a while that I felt had some potential, that I was excited about. I look at this person and I'm like, wow, she's intelligent and she's funny and I love her demeanor. She's fun to be around. It's just like there's a lot of positive things there, right? And of course, when you have some type of an emotional investment, then the threats are bigger. If somebody is not interested in you and you're not interested in them, then who cares? But when you start to have some level of emotional connection and interest in somebody, of course, there's more of a threat to you there. And so in the past with anxious attachment style, if I had somebody that I was interested in, it can be really easy to let that get out of control and be like second guessing myself all the time. Dang, they haven't texted for a little while, so what does that mean? Or, oh, look at that response they sent me. What does that mean? Like, it's really easy to overthink everything, to overthink their actions or lack of actions or your actions or the things that you said. And so as I've grown as a person, I don't have the really, really strong emotional fear in dating that I used to. But that can still try and creep its way back into my life. And so if you go back to that scale, it's really, to me, the difference is on one side of this scale is fear. And on the other side is excitement. Or another way of looking at it is pessimism on one side and optimism on the other. There's not a huge difference between fear and excitement. It's really a matter of what you're focused on. Because in both scenarios, I'm looking at all the possibilities of ways things can hurt me and go wrong. And excitement, on the other hand, is looking at all the potential and the possibilities of how things can go right. For instance, in that relationship scenario that I just talked about, the difference really is my focus. I can be really focused on all the threats in that relationship. But what I want to do is I want to rebalance it. And when I say balance it, it doesn't mean that I have equal amounts. I don't think it's all one or the other. I don't want complete optimism. I don't want complete pessimism. I don't want optimism and pessimism in equal shares. To me, you want things weighted more towards the optimism side. Because when you're in a fear response, you already have that scale completely loaded up with threat. So I'm going to counter that by looking, what ways are things going right? What are the conversations that I've had? What are the actions that that person's taken? What are the things that I've done? What are all the amazing things? In some ways, it's really about like gratitude, right? It's focusing on all the positives that I have to look forward to. So to me, when you're in a fear response, that's what you need to do, is you need to overload that other side of the scale with gratitude, with optimism, and look at all the ways that things can work out right. You've already spent time looking at the threats because you want to look at threats. You want to know what things, whenever you feel fear, you want to understand that, and you want to see if there's any legitimate threat to your safety, whether that's your emotional safety, your physical safety, whatever it may be. You need to understand those threats. But don't sit there and ruminate on it. Don't sit there and focus on it over and over and over again. Start countering that by loading up with optimism and gratitude. The other thing I think can really help you is to just kind of step into an identity. When I'm talking about working with a client, I have a side of me that has had all these years of experience helping people. There's a side of me that believes in myself, that understands that I have ways to find solutions to things. And so I can step into that identity. I just like, you know what? I've got this. I know that no matter what happens, I have the abilities to take care of this client. If this sale doesn't go through, I'm going to be able to help them find a new buyer. If this sale has an issue, I'm going to be able to help them negotiate. I'm going to be able to help them find solutions in order to make it a win for my client, first and foremost, but also make it to where the buyer is satisfied. So when you have that identity, find an identity that's going to serve you in whatever area that you're dealing with, whatever fear you're challenged with. What identity can you step into that's going to be able to handle that? That's going to be able to handle those emotions in a better, more powerful way. I understand, it can feel really heavy. I really believe that the universe brings things into our life to help us grow in the ways that we need to grow. And whether that's fear or some other emotion, it's amazing how we constantly have similar challenges come time and time again into our lives. I believe it's because we haven't learned the lesson that we need to learn yet. When you constantly are being taught the same lesson over and over again, it can feel daunting. It can feel overwhelming, and you just want a break. It's like, Uncle, please, please give me a break. I'm ready for things to go easily for a while. So I'm not saying this is easy. I'm not saying that when you're feeling overwhelmed and scared, that it's just as simple as, oh, look, this isn't real, or I can find a solution. But I think it's important to remind yourself that you've dealt with this before. You've dealt with hard times. So figure out how to calm yourself. What can I do to calm myself down, or at least enough in order for me to think logically? And then go out and start doing these things. Start finding knowledge. Start cultivating your beliefs. Start recognizing your faith, and realize how you can deal with the things that are coming at you. I hope that you can see how this is a process. Every emotion is a process. It's just about figuring out how to show up for yourself and give yourself the safety that you're desiring. I know you can do it. It takes practice, it takes time, but you'll get there. Thank you so much for spending another week talking with me and discussing these topics. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Any suggestions, I'm always open to hearing your ideas and thoughts. And until next week, remember that you are not alone.